Today on Contrabass Conversations, we are chatting with Dave Swift of the Jools Holland Band. We talk about transcribing life on the road, playing with Paul Simon, Smokey Robinson, and much more. Well, welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here. And please check out contrabassconversations.com, our website. It's got everything past, present, and future about this show. There's a lot going on here. And I'd love to hear from you. Reach out. Send me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know about yourself. Let me know any news, any guests, anything you'd like on the show. This is a community show, and I'd love to hear from you. And I know you're going to love today's episode with Dave Swift, who is probably the UK's best-known bassist. As the bass player for Jools Holland's band, Dave has played with pretty much every big name in the music industry, from George Benson and Chaka Kahn to Eric Clapton and Paul Simon. In fact, there's a list on Dave's website, which is a great website. There's a list with every artist that he's played with, and it's staggering. I mean, you have to check this out. So check out the show notes and check out this list. Now, Dave recently appeared on a new podcast called The Lean Musician, and I love being able to hear interviews with guests that I'm going to have on my show because it gives me a great launching off point for my talk with them. So we start today talking about what Dave was talking about on The Lean Musician, and definitely check out Dave's episode on that and subscribe to The Lean Musician. It's a great new offering. I got a link to that also in the show notes. Now, Dave's side of the audio came through a little hot in this conversation. We were chatting on Skype, but it's still, you can still totally understand everything, but just to let you know, but it's such a great conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it, and even if the audio is a little bit grainy, don't worry about it. It's great stuff. Now, I'm so thrilled to have D'Addario Strings sponsoring Contrabass Conversations, and I want to talk a bit about their Zyx strings, which are synthetic gut strings. They have a gut-like quality to them. I've been using them for the last 6 weeks or so, really enjoying them. Interesting sound. They're made in the United States, made at the D'Addario String Factory in New York. And D'Addario has a string giveaway for Contrabass Conversations listeners. You go to contrabassconversations.com/strings. Remember that, /strings. And again, link in the show notes to be entered in a string giveaway. And thank you, folks, for sponsoring the podcast. I'd also like to let you know that Bass Capos is now providing the hosting for Contrabass Conversations. There are a lot of different costs that go into doing a show like this, from website and space to download the podcast. That gets to be a pretty big number with a show of this magnitude and audience. And I'm so thrilled that Rob Anzalotti, who runs Bass Capos, is providing this. Rob was on the podcast recently. If you haven't checked out his interview, very interesting. He and Chris Mathers and I talk about the whole journey that Rob had to create this company. You can check out contrabassconversations.com/Rob Anzalotti if you want to check that out. But Bass Capos, they're an excellent choice for any bass player looking to implement a double bass extension or using a double bass extension. They're easy to install and adjust. They're cheaper and they're more reliable than hand-built latches. They're also lighter and quicker in operation. So learn more at basscapos.com, and thank you, Rob, for providing the hosting for Contrabass Conversations. All right, here we go with our interview featuring Dave Swift. It was so interesting to listen to how you prepare for a performance with Jools and the transcribing that you do. And I just thought that was so interesting. So I'd love, we can get going here, and I'd love to dig into that too, because I think that's just sounds like a fascinating process that you've come to discover.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's the thing is, because I've always read music, so I'm the only person in the rhythm section that reads music.
Mm-hmm.
There's me in the horn section who read written notation, but the rest of them don't. So when we get given anything to play with Jools on our TV or radio show, the rhythm section, we just get given either a CD or we get sent an MP3.
Okay.
Via email. So, Jools will probably listen to the music while he's in the shower, or driving along in his car. So Jools listens to it in a very, kind of casual, I guess, more organic way, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, but Jools knows I'm one for detail. So what I do is, whether it's CD or MP3, the first thing I do is I transcribe the original bass line note for note, kind of thing. Because if you're playing with, a very well-known, prestigious artist, more often than not, they want what's on the recording, because you're playing one of their hits, or you might be playing a new record off an album. So I think to myself that it's important to have what's there to begin with. So I transcribe everything, mistakes and all. I do the whole thing, and I don't have any kind of software. I do it all. I've got like 100 2B pencils and a whole box of erasers and now a manuscript. So I'm still doing it old school.
Yeah,
and I like that too, because when I end up then reading it, it's my own writing, it's my own sort of notation. So for me, it's more recognizable, and also. But by transcribing, you get inside the music. You know what it's like. If someone else gives you a transcription of anything, one, you have to question its accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
No disrespect to other people, but I've been given a lot of bad transcriptions.
Sure.
So when I do my own, I know it's going to be. I'm going to spend a lot of time with it, and so I'll have everything down note for note. And then when we turn up at the studio, whether it's the TV or the radio studio, I'll always inquire how accurate they want it to be. Do they want it as the original recording? And some of them say yes, absolutely. They want it note for note. So then I think, well, that's great, because I've already done the majority of the work.
Yeah.
And if they then say, you can free it up, you can sort of fool around with it, then that's fine with me. I'll happily improvise around it. But if I turn up and I haven't done the transcription, so in other words, I've just listened to it in a very casual manner, and then they turn around and say, we want exactly what's on the record, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Because then you've got to go to another room and you've got to start from scratch. You've got to listen to it all over again. So I like to get the hard work, the graft out the way to begin with.
Yeah.
And then, if there's time, say on a TV show, when you don't really want to be seen staring at a page, I'll make every attempt to learn that off by heart. And that's just a case of repetition and just being at home and playing over and over again. And more often than not, I'll do that. But sometimes, if time is a factor, I'll end up reading the transcription. But I'll be discreet if it's a TV, But I've got like folders and folders, like with thousands of transcriptions. Because every time I play with anyone on Jools' show, if you look at my CV, all the list of those names, I will have a transcription or more for each artist.
Did you start that? Did you start that right off from the beginning, playing with Jools, or was that something that kind of evolved?
No, I did it with Jools, because here's the thing with me, Jason. When I first started to play, I was a classically trained trombonist. Mm-hmm. Trombone was my first instrument, so I learned music from reading it. Okay. I didn't learn to play by ear. That took me a lot longer to get into. So for me, at the beginning, everything was written down and whatever. So when I got the Jools gig, I was still carrying that over, so I wanted, I still wanted to have that accuracy of having things written down. But the great thing with the Jools gig is it really helped me at the same time, it helped me to free myself up from the written part, because I realized there was a lot of stuff that we were going to be doing that there was no time to do transcriptions. Sometimes we were playing by the seat of our pants. On Jools' radio show, for instance, he's got a BBC Radio 2 show. Mm-hmm. That's been going 17 years now. Most people don't realize that he has a radio show. They just associate him with a TV one. Sure. But for the first 10 years, we knew who the guest was going to be, but we didn't know what the song was going to be until they turned up. So, a good example, Amy Winehouse was on the show once, and she turned up at the studio, and we were all thrilled to be working with her. But the rhythm section was sitting there kind of thinking, well, what song is she going to do? Because we haven't been told a thing. And then she picked one of the songs off her album at the time, and we had to learn it in front of her. Wow. She's sitting there filing her nails, and her manager put the CD of the album on in the background, and we had to sit there in front of Amy Winehouse, and we had to learn it. And we had 2 run-throughs. We got to listen to it twice, and then we had to record it live with her on the radio show. So I did that for 10 years with Jools. So there I didn't have the luxury of transcriptions, but what it did do, it did wonders for my ears. Yeah. because I was forced into that situation where it's fight or flight, sink or swim. You know, we had to do it. You know, my ears grew very quickly.
I'm sure. I can't even imagine what that must have been like, especially, I mean, the pressure of doing that anyway is intense, but then to do it in front of somebody like Amy Winehouse, and you've got two run-throughs. How were you, when you were first starting out? I mean, obviously you do that for 10 years. You develop some chops with that. Were you writing things down when you were listening? Were you fingering through things on the bass? How on earth were you learning that song?
That's a good question. I mean, again, there was no time to write anything down, but yeah, definitely I had the bass on my lap. We all had our instruments there, the rhythm section, and, you know, you're just quietly tapping the notes, you know, without playing too loud, and you're just kind of mapping it out. And the truth of it is, Jason, I mean, I've been a professional musician for 35 years. I've been with Jools for 25 years, so 10 years prior to that, I was a freelance session musician. And the truth of it is, in that time, I've had a lot of experience. I've played with a lot of people. So a lot of it is down. It's just down to that. It's down to I've already played thousands and thousands of songs, and obviously you start to recognize song forms. You know, you start to, you know, if you play enough songs, there's only so many variations you can do. And we're talking mostly in pop culture here, you know, pop song stuff. So yeah, it's down to anything. It's more down to experience. It's just the amount of times I've had to play similar tunes. But there's also that thing where there's no other way to describe it other than you have to do it. You've got to find a way. You know, you've got to pull all the stops out, and you've just got to, you know, use your memory, experience, ears, whatever it takes, because you can't turn around after 2 run-throughs and turn around to someone like Amy Winehouse and say, I'm sorry, darling, I still haven't got it. Can I hear it another 10 times?
that might be the end of the gig if that was what happened.
But you know, that's something that I couldn't have done when I was much younger. I mean, I was only able to do that after playing for like 20 odd years, sort of thing. So experience is a great thing.
Well, you know, you're what you're most well known for is all this work with Jools Band and all these people that you've performed with. But I love your background is totally fascinating to me, because so like trombonist, becoming a bass player, and then maybe let's rewind. Can you just talk about how you got into music in the first place? When did that happen?
Well, people often say to me, do you come from a musical family? And the answer is yes and no, because my parents, they weren't musical themselves, but they listened to music. So around the house, there was always music being played. You know, my dad had a couple of Peggy Lee albums. He loved opera for some reason. I don't know why, because both my parents were very working class people. They were factory workers. But yeah, there was always music in the house, Glenn Miller and things like that. And then I've got 2 older brothers who are 8 and 11 years older than me. And they both played acoustic guitar. So there was kind of instruments in the house, and they were listening to things like Jimi Hendrix, Joni Mitchell, Cream. And I was a little kid stuck in the middle of all this. So, but music was, you know, I mean, the first 2 films I saw at the cinema were The Sound of Music and Paint Your Wagon.
Nice. There we go.
With Clint Eastwood singing I Talk to the Trees. You know, so I was there was music in the air, kind of thing. And also I discovered I had a good singing voice. So in the early days, I was always picked to sing in the school choir. And then when I was a little bit older, I sang in the church choir, and I was in the church choir for 10 years. So, but playing an instrument, it didn't kind of, I didn't consider it, because as a kid, I was into horror movies. I love horror science fiction movies. And I wanted to be a horror movie makeup man. I was always making myself into monsters every day. So again, you know, although I like music, I wasn't thinking of doing it anyway. So at secondary school, after a few failed attempts at playing a few other things, I really fancied the idea of the trombone. So I was 14 years of age. I went to the trombone teacher and I said, I'd like to have lessons. He said, I can't take you on. And I said, why is that? He said, you're too old.
Oh.
At 14 years of age.
Wow.
So I pleaded with him. I said, and one of the main reasons is because he taught on a Thursday afternoon when I had double physics, and I hated double physics. I couldn't stand it. So it was important for me to study with this guy because then I'd miss that lesson kind of thing. So he said, okay, begrudgingly he took me on, and I took the trombone home with one of those tune a day book one kind of beginner books, and something magical happened. Me and the trombone, we bonded instantly, and I absolutely loved it. And I find, and the thing is, the other thing is, I wasn't a very good academic at school. I was overwhelmed by academia. I was very intimidated by it. So all of a sudden, I found something that I really loved and wanted to practice, you know. When I got the trombone, I couldn't put the thing down. I absolutely loved it. So the next thing is, 6 months later, the school band needed a bass guitar player. So I volunteered for whatever reason, because I guess my brothers played a bit of guitar, so I had some experience with a stringed instrument. So I took up the bass guitar, and because I could already read now, there was nothing that I couldn't play on the bass guitar that I'd already played on the trombone. The trombone was a big help to me. And then my trombone teacher turned around and said, listen, you're really good on both of these instruments, and I can probably get you some work when you leave school as a professional bass player. There wasn't anything wrong with my trombone playing, I hasten to add. but it's just the fact that he wanted all the trombone gigs for himself.
Okay.
So he wasn't going to recommend me for the trombone. But he knew bass players back then, where I'm originally from, there were not many people who could read. There were a lot of bass owners and guys that could just busk, but guys who could read were few and far between. So then he said to me, you know, you should take up acoustic bass, like acoustic double bass. He said, because if you do that, there's not many people that double up and that play both well. And he said, if you do that, you'll get a lot more work. And that's what happened. So I took up the upright, and so I'm self-taught as a bassist, formally self-taught as a bass player. And so I left school, and then he started to get me gigs, and I couldn't believe that people were actually paying me money to play music, because I never anticipated that. I never intended to be a musician. I never intended to be a professional musician. It all happened completely by accident.
Isn't that interesting how that happens so often to people? That's great. I love that line you just said. We're a lot of bass owners, but not.
Oh yeah. Well, particularly with upright players as well. There was a lot of guys, you know, and you couldn't hear them on gigs, and they're thumping away in the background. And basically, they could have been playing anything.
Yeah.
But because they actually had a bass, they would get the gig.
Right.
So. But I was far more conscientious than that. I didn't want to do things by half, so I really worked hard, you know, with all three instruments at the time. But like I said, I was self-taught as a bass player. I had a couple of lessons early on with a couple of orchestral players, just to get some technique together.
Sure.
And much later on, I actually studied with Michael Moore.
Oh, I'm familiar with him. In fact, I think he wrote
the book.
Yeah, which is a fascinating technique book that he's got. What was that experience like working with Michael? I've never met him personally, but I've heard so much about him. What was he like as a teacher?
Well, here's the thing. This was much later. This was after I'd moved to London. This was like the early 90s. And what happened is that I've always been very conscientious about studying. I think it's because I left school at 16 and I didn't go to college. So after that, I was determined to kind of make up for all that lost time. So someone told me that he'd moved to London. He'd come over with his wife, I think, and they sort of said, and he's looking to do some teaching. So they sort of said, you know, you should go along. And I knew him from a couple of recordings that I had, and I always loved his playing, beautiful melodic, playing great sort of thumb technique. So I just thought, wow, this is I've got to do this. So I went to study with him probably for the best part of 6 months. But here's the thing, Jason, about that time. I didn't fully appreciate what he was kind of showing me. In other words, I was asking him more about technique and fingerings and stuff. And it wasn't until sometime afterwards, and I look back and I thought, oh, there's so much more that more in-depth stuff. I was asking him very kind of sort of fundamental things. You know, I wanted help with my thumb position. And also the one thing Michael did do, he put me onto the German bow.
Okay.
I've been playing just a little bit with French. I mean, I don't use the bow very much, but I'd use French bow. And he'd been studying the Ludwig Streicher method. So he'd switched to the German bow, and he said, I much prefer it. I think you will too. So he definitely gave me some arco lessons. But you know, I just wish, the thing is, because I was quite young at the time, I was still in my 20s. And like, you know, if I was studying with him now, or even when I was in my 30s or in my 40s, it would have been a very different experience, because there would have been so many more in-depth things I would have asked him. So I just feel as though, I should have asked him a lot more things. But, you know, because he played piano too. So during our lessons, he played piano and he'd run through some standards. And I would sort of play bass with him. And he even gave me some rudimental piano lessons. So I'd sit there kind of plonking out some chords badly while he then played the bass and solo. So I could hear what he was doing. So it was, I mean, they were still invaluable lessons. They were still fantastic. I just wish that I'd, you know, just been a bit more conscientious of it. I could have asked him so much more things, but yeah, it was still a great experience. He was just one of the best, lovely man as well, just a wonderful guy. And I think his last gig was with Dave Brubeck, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that sounds right. That's fascinating. I remember picking up his book when I was in college and looking through, and just such an interesting approach to thumb position and just like mapping out on the bass.
He showed me that before he did the book. This is way before that book came out. So I've actually got sort of notes that he did when he was working on that book. You know, the stuff he was giving me in the lessons later became the main body of that book. So that was pretty cool.
Wow, how that's so cool. Yeah, that was one of those books that really changed the way I thought about the bass, and especially the bass in a jazz context. You know, just like, yeah. So I'd love to know. So if we go back to were you keeping the trombone active once you got into playing the electric and double bass?
You know what, I was, but not for long, because I mean the trombone was a great thing for me, because I was playing the trombone in every band imaginable. So I was playing in orchestras, I was playing in big bands, I was playing in funk bands, in little horn sections, I was playing in brass bands. And that was the thing as well. With all of those things, I was having to read 4 different clefs. You know, because brass band, trombone's always written in treble clef for some bizarre reason. And as you know, orchestral stuff, bass, alto, tenor, all that kind of thing. So yeah, the trombone for me was such a big help in making the transition to play bass. So yeah, I was playing all 3 instruments, but then quite quickly the whole world of bass took over. I was getting much more work, because let's face it, virtually every band needs a bass player. Not every band needs a trombone player.
Very true.
So I was, I was taking on much more work as an electric and an upright bassist. And the thing is, because I was so conscientious about practicing, I just thought to myself, I was exhausted because of trying to keep those 3 instruments up to a very high standard. I just couldn't do it, and especially when I started to tour as well. So the trombone went by the wayside. But I guess I kept it up for about 4 or 5 years into being a pro bass player. But funnily enough, I took it up again a few years ago, just for my own amusement, and for no one else's. Actually, for everyone else's amusement. No, but it was really tough. It was really tough getting back into it, because it was so much harder as an adult. Mm-hmm. When I took it up as a 14-year-old, it seemed to be a lot easier to me. But when I took it up all these years later, it was tough. But what's kind of fun now is that there's this interesting cross-pollination going on, because what I learned on the trombone, I put onto the bass at the beginning, and now I'm doing it the other way around. You know, I'm using all my knowledge from being a bass player all these years to put on the trombone. But whether or not I'll actually kind of gig on it, I'm not sure yet. It's just, at the moment, it's for my own amusement.
Well, it's interesting, because, you know, like, you take that many years off, and it's almost like you're coming to an instrument fresh, right? Even though you did it in your youth. And I wonder, it must be kind of cool. You know, the thing that trombone does is you have, because you're using your breath, you know, phrasing is like a different concept on a wind instrument than on bass. That must be an interesting thing to explore.
Well, I think that's the reason why I was so keen to go back to it, because, I mean, bearing in mind, Jason, predominantly my upright playing it's really kind of like 98% pizzicato, what I have to do. I just did a tour recently with a guy called Alexander Armstrong, who's he's basically he's a TV show host, but he is a comedian as well, but he sings too. And on his last tour, his music was very orchestral, so the whole thing was arco the whole time, which I love doing. But other than that, virtually everything I do with Jools, it's either blues, big band, sort of pop stuff, you know. So yeah, I don't use the bow that much. So and I guess I was remembering what it was like being a brass player, and I missed playing something that you're actually physically putting air through the instrument, and it just seemed a lot more personal to me. Now, had I been more of an orchestral player, where I'm playing predominantly with a bow, where, you know, phrasing is much more important and you can do a lot more with it, it wouldn't have been so bad. But I guess because I was doing mostly pits, you know, I was missing having an instrument that I could sustain notes on and put a lot more expression into. So yeah, that's why I really wanted to go back to revisit the trombone, you know. And also, I was also fascinated by, you know, same with fretless bass guitar, the whole thing where there's no set positions. The trombone is the same. I enjoyed the fact there's more of a challenge there. You have to use your ears more. You know, it seemed far more interesting challenge for me to pick that instrument. So yeah, and it's nice now just sitting home playing melodies on the trombone, whereas before I didn't get a chance to do that. I was playing just horn parts, or, you know. So yeah, it's definitely, but the two have helped each other. There's definitely been a good connection with them.
Yeah.
So.
What and I know that jazz has been a passion for you your whole life, and like early on you were really working as at least a lot of your work was as a jazz bassist prior to Jools band. Is that right?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Well, this is what I always aspired to be a full-time jazz musician, and I always sort of practiced. Everything I was practicing was, I remember the first time I went to New York was on the QE2, you know, the original Queen Elizabeth cruise ship. And the first thing I did, I went with a friend of mine, a renowned British jazz saxophonist called Julian Arguelles, and we were in this kind of house band on the ship. And I remember we got to New York and we couldn't be more excited. We'd never been there before, and coming in on the QE2 as well. How cool is that? And we straight away we went to Manny's and we bought a couple of fake books. And back then you had to get them under the counter. I think they were in a brown paper bag, because I think they were still illegal or something like that. And we get back to the cruise, and I bought a load of those Jamie Aebersold play-along things, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn all those standards. So even though the stuff that we were playing on the cruise ship wasn't always what we wanted to be playing, you know, in our own time, we'd always be sitting learning songs, and I'd be transcribing weather report stuff, you know. So even though I was playing, I guess, more cabaret type things at the time, my aspirations were always higher. So any of my spare time was always practicing, you know, sort of jazz techniques, whether I was transcribing Ray Brown bass lines or solos or Chaka stuff. But the trouble is, well, here's the thing. When I moved to London after 10 years of being a session guy, and bearing in mind I'm talking about having to play other people's charts, reading written notation, you know, some of it was quite strict. And I was desperate to play with more creative musicians, playing creative music. And that's why I moved to London. I actually wanted to go and study at Berkeley, but at the time, in the 80s, it was so expensive. I just couldn't afford to go there. So for me, the next best thing was moving to London. And I did that at the end of the 80s. And all I did, I didn't play electric bass at all. I played upright exclusively. And all I did was I just said to myself, okay, I knew I could have gone and done a West End show. I could have easily sat in on that. I could have done more sessions, all sorts of things. And I said, no, I've done all this before. This is old territory. Now I want to play jazz properly, full time. So I just decided just to play with those kind of musicians. So I went to jam sessions, whatever, and so I played exclusively with jazz guys, and still while I was at home, listening to Bill Evans albums and transcribing Scotty and all that kind of stuff. So, but then I got the Jools gig, and I had a real dilemma there, because although I was enjoying now finally being a full-time jazz musician, I really was suffering for my art. And I mean suffering. And then all of a sudden the Jools gig came along, and there was an opportunity to play with, quite a well-known, high-profile guy in the music industry. And it was a real dilemma which way to go. So and bear in mind, back then with Jools, he wasn't the person he is now. He didn't have the TV show that he has. He'd only just left Squeeze. He's the pop band that he used to be in. So he was just starting out as a solo artist. So in fairness, he didn't have the TV, didn't have the radio show. He wasn't the guy that he is now. So it wasn't as though I had this kind of all this on offer. Actually, it was just a few gigs at the time. But I guess I thought to myself, well, maybe this could be good for my career. So I chose to go with Jools. Now, admittedly, a lot of stuff that we do is kind of jazz orientated. It's big band, blues stuff, but it's not what you'd call hardcore jazz. We're not really playing sort of bebop or anything like that. So that's the reason why, in between doing the Jools gig, I still try and do those gigs, because I'm not doing a lot of that with Jools. It's much more commercial band now, But the jazz thing for me has always been the most important thing. If you look at my record collection, and there's loads of funk in there, there's rock stuff, there's pop, but 98% of it is jazz. So that's what I listen to. This is what I still practice at home. I'm still transcribing all the time. Great bass players, solos, and that stuff. So that's still my main motivation.
Well, you were talking about how you transcribe for Jools band. Is that what you would do when transcribing, like Chaka or Scalafaro, or would you sit down with pencil and paper and transcribe, or how did you do that exactly?
Well, what I used to do is probably not with a double bass, because I've got like a little tiny music room that is actually not big enough to get a double bass in there.
Okay.
So yeah, but I have a bass guitar with me, and when I first started to do transcriptions, do you know what? I think I might be old enough, Jason, to actually remember lifting the needle off the record and going back over and over. I may be that old. But of course, you use the cassette player a lot of the time. But then the revelation for me was getting one of I think it was made by Tascam, and they did like a little bass trainer, it was called, and you could slow the CD down and that stuff. And but then later on, I upgraded to the software you can get. I think what is it now? You get to the Amazing Slow Downer and Transcribe. But yeah, it was still me in a room with a piece of manuscript and a pencil, and just doing it by hand. I remember once I did a transcription of Jacko's Donna Lee from the solo album, and I mean the whole thing.
Oh wow!
And yeah, I know. And you know what? It must have taken me 6 months. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't sitting in that chair doing nothing else for 6 months. I was actually sleeping and eating. Yeah. Going to the theatre, having a life, but a lot of time, and I just, it's God knows how many pages long, 8 pages long, whatever. But transcriptions for me, I love doing them, because as I know a lot of younger players, they don't like doing them because it's a lot of work. It's really seriously hard work, and the thing is, these days there's so many transcription books you can buy. And these people just want to go and buy these books and have an easy life. But what I always say to them is, first of all, a lot of books are quite inaccurate. I've seen some shocking transcription books over the years. I mean, I won't name names, but there's a lot of bad ones out there. And apart from anything else, if you're just reading someone else's transcription, you're not really getting into the heart of the song or the bass line or the solo. It's only when you start to transcribe it yourself that it really starts to to seep into every pore of your body. And that's, to me, that's how you learn. That's how you really, really learn on a deeper level. So I've always done that. And I've always said, the hard work is its own reward. It's good for your ears. It's good for your writing skills. Everything about transcription is wonderful. And I do it all the time. It's quite scary, though, when I look back at some of my early Jacko stuff. I remember I transcribed Black Market once, and I look at it now, and it's so bad. There's like bars of 7 and 4.5, and 3 and 7/8. Because I don't know. If for some reason when I was younger, my reading was better than my writing, my transcriptions. But I've worked hard a lot on that. So now I'm pretty happy with that. And what I've got at home, I've got several folders of all my favorite bass players, and each folder is jam-packed with transcriptions of theirs. So I'm a big, big fan of Anthony Jackson. He's one of my favorite bass guitarists of all time. So I've got an Anthony Jackson pad. I've got a Jacko pad. I think I've got a Pino Palladino one. And I just spent, and I've got, Jimmy Blanton, Ray Brown, all those guys. And yeah, they're just wonderful things to have. And like I said, and you really get into the heart and soul of those players when you scrutinize things like that. And the only way to do that is by transcription.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah. It's like if you don't do if you just buy a book, you're kind of missing the point. It's so interesting to me that you're being a player that really good reader, and I'm a good reader too. And talking to some other people that are good readers and then move into an area where you rely so much more on your ears, like what you do now. It's almost like the reading for a lot of people is like a crutch, like your ability to do that well. It almost like narrows your ability to like really hear things. And was it in Jools' band that you really started to get comfortable learning things by ear?
Yes. Yeah, very much so. I mean, that's a really good point. When I first started off as a trombone player and a bass player, if you put anything in front of me, whether it was like a solo or bass part, I was fine. But I'm talking about written notation here. And even further, when I started to play in big bands, I was fine with all the written charts. And all of a sudden, I started to get all these other parts with just chord symbols. And here's the thing, Jason, I didn't fully understand. I mean, I recognize really basic stuff. But when you start to see altered dominant chords and the more advanced harmony, I hadn't got a clue because I'd never studied harmony. My music education was from the trombone. So I never played the piano. I didn't study a harmony instrument. So all of a sudden, I'm getting these big band charts with chords everywhere. And this was tough for me. And then I remember I played in one big band, and there was a couple of the older guys in it. And during each show, and we had a pad, we had a whole pad of music, and I was fine with that. But during the show, they'd call out a small group, and they'd play like just a standard with like 4 of us. And they called me out, and they called, I don't know, it might have been All the Things You Are, and I'm looking at them kind of going, well, how? Now, if you'd have given me the part for it, or even a chord chart, I'd be fine. But I just didn't know it because I'd never been in a situation where I had to play without charts. That was the thing. Everything I did was music written down. So when I got the Jools gig, and I realized quickly on that there wasn't going to be, I wasn't going to be given a written bass part for anything. That was for sure. At best, I may have been given a chord chart, but I realized most of it was. I got given two plastic bags worth of cassette tapes of all Jools' stuff, and I had to go home and kind of learn it. Now, I admit it. First of all, I transcribed it all, and most of it was just walking lines. But I got stuck in the old ways, whereas I felt as though if I'm going to do a good job of this, I had to have it on the written page. But then I quickly realized how cumbersome this was. And then the more gigs I did with Jools, the better my ears got, and the more I realized I don't have to rely on this anymore. But it was a lengthy transition. It didn't happen overnight. It took me a while to. So in other words, my reading was way superior to my ability to play by ear, and it took me a few years to level those two things up. And so now I'm really happy with both. In fact, now it's rare that I get asked to read. The main reading I do is of my own transcriptions, because everything else, it's all learned. I mean, for instance, I do the jazz gig I was doing last night. There's these clubs called the Boysdale clubs in London. There's 3 of them, and they have music every night. And the great thing is there's a house double bass at each one of them. There's a piano there. There's a drum kit, so you don't have to take a thing. Admittedly, the quality of the instrument and the setup of the instrument can leave something to be desired. But just the fact that you turn up and you don't have to bring your own gear. But on those gigs, I don't know. I know I'm going to say be playing with a piano player and a drummer, but I don't necessarily know who they are or which one it's going to be. And I also don't know what tunes are going to be called. So, and I love that now. Now, there was a time when I was younger, in my teens, early 20s, that would have been my worst nightmare. Turning up, playing with someone you didn't know, playing tunes that you've never... Well, I just couldn't have done it, frankly. So it's just taken me... it's taken a while to do that transition, and spending more time on ear training. I mean, that's what I started to do. I actually brought a lot of ear training tapes, some of the David Baker stuff I did. And also a big thing was I studied privately with a few people, and I'm talking about harmony. I studied with Michael Moore on the instrument itself, but I studied with a few people that went to Berkeley, because I'd never studied harmony in my life, and that opened up everything to me. I realized how little I knew. So I was playing for years before I studied the more academic side of it. And this is an interesting point as well. Going back to Michael Moore, when I was studying with him, I did say to him, I said, improvisation has always been more of a challenge for me because of my background, coming from a strict reading background. So I said, it's taken me a lot longer to be able to play by ear and to be able to improvise confidently. And he told me this thing. He said to me, he was teaching at a Jamie Aebersold school once, a summer school, and he had some time free, and he was wandering around. Oh, I'm sorry, I've moved the camera. He was wandering around, sitting in on the other tutors' lessons, and I think someone was giving a lesson. I know they were harmonizing the melodic and harmonic minor scales and coming up with all the modes from those. And Michael Moore was in the back of the classroom, and he said, I was watching this stuff, and he said, I realized something. He said, what they were teaching, I'd been doing for years, naturally. Like he'd been playing these kind of modes, but he didn't know what they were called. And he hadn't studied them in any kind of academic way. But here he was seeing these guys put on a blackboard. And he said, it's so weird that he'd already been doing it, because he'd just been listening to the recordings of people. He'd been transcribing stuff and playing along. And I think he said to me, he said, thank goodness that I did it this way around. He said, because I think if I'd have started this way, he said, it might have driven me crazy.
Right. I like that.
He'd come from a very organic, old school way of learning to play by listening to other players.
Yeah. That seems like the more organic way to do it, rather than learning all the labels in school and then trying to fit. Yeah.
But not to take it away from academia, though. I mean, not at all saying that's no part of it. But I think what I've noticed these days with younger musicians, they put too much emphasis on the academic side of it. So they think, if they don't sort of study all this harmony and theory, they can't even begin to improvise until they've studied that stuff. They feel as though they're not qualified, which isn't the case. I mean, it's the same given like a newborn baby a dictionary. Mm-hmm. And saying, don't even think about forming a sentence until you've learned every word in this book and its meaning.
That's a great analogy. I love that, because people get so petrified with improvisation. It's like they don't even know what to do first. And you got to know every single mode and this, and you got to know how to do every 2-5-1 and this and this. I love that. That's a fantastic point.
Yeah, I think people they still don't listen enough. I think, and the trouble is there's so many books on jazz improvisation now. You go into a store and there's a shelf full of it. And I think people think that if you take the book off the shelf and you own that book, something magical is going to happen. And do you know what? I know guys that own those books and they put them on the shelves and they never actually look at them. They never actually read them, rather. But they look on the shelf and they see how to improvise jazz and stuff. And they think just by owning it, that there's going to be some weird osmosis happen. And the information is going to seep into their subconscious, But I think, there is a maybe too much emphasis on that study of that stuff. I think not enough people are listening enough, going back to the masters. And just, someone said to me once, he was a jazz guitarist, and he said, listen more than you play. And I think by that he meant the trouble is so many people at home now are just practicing like crazy, and they run out of time to actually sit and listen to an Oscar Peterson album, to a Charlie Hayden album, something like that, or whatever. They're so, because they think, I've got to do this amount of practice today. I haven't done these scales. I haven't done technique. I haven't done bone stuff. And they go a whole day without listening to a piece of music. And I think that's what this jazz guitarist meant, because he was from a more old school way. He learned purely. I don't think he studied harmony in his life. He just learned from listening to all the great guitar players.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That's something I've noticed myself talking to different people and looking at people I've known through the years. And it seems like the people that would actually go to concerts and see concerts and listen to great recordings, they end up being the people that 10, 20 years later are really doing kind of the more significant things than the people who had all the chops and they were staying in the practice room Friday night and woodshedding. It seemed like the people that actually went out and took in the music.
Well, interestingly, some of my favorite players are guys that didn't go to music college, didn't study. I mean, a good example of that is Anthony Jackson. I mean, for me, he is just one of the most phenomenal electric bass players of all time, and the inventor of the modern day 6-string bass as well. But he's an incredible musician. But I know Anthony wanted to go to Berkeley back in the day, and back then you couldn't go if you were an electric bass player. They wouldn't take you on. I think you had to play upright. So he didn't go. He and as far as I know, he didn't go to college. I think he certainly studied with a few guys privately. I know he studied with Pat Martino a couple of things, but I think Anthony's mostly self-taught as far as I tell. And to me, he's probably my favorite living bass guitarist, way more than a lot of the guys that went to loads of colleges and did degrees. And again, I'm not taking away from them; they're still phenomenal players. But do they impress me? Sure. Do they move me? Maybe not so much. Yeah. and that's the thing with me with music, Jason. I want to be moved more than I want to be impressed. Is what I'm saying. That's more the key thing for me.
I'd love, and kind of along those lines, I was listening to that Lean Musician episode that you're on, and you talked a bit about getting into Jools' band and kind of how almost being told that you were playing too much, and I'd love to hear just like, how did that experience like change your bass playing? Like from maybe like starting the band to a couple of years down the road?
Well, it was quite radical actually, because prior to being with Jools, most other things I did, I was always told off for overplaying. And I guess the reason is because I was studying Chaka, I was studying Anthony, I was studying these guys, and I was studying all the chops. I probably wasn't paying enough attention to their good tastes, which of course they had plenty of. But when you're kind of younger, you want to impress people and you want to be noticed. But yeah, when I got the Jools gig, well, first of all, the reason why he wanted me more was because I played upright. A couple of the bass players he had before me didn't play upright, so that was a big part of it. But he wasn't that interested in me playing bass guitar at all. He really wanted me to stick with that. But then, we started to do a lot more TV stuff where we were playing very commercial music. And the turning point, we were playing with Chaka Kahn on a TV show. And she wanted to do a couple of hits, Ain't Nobody, I'm Every Woman. And I said to Jools, these are going to be hard work on string bass. These are going to be really hard work. I said, let me play the bass guitar. And he just didn't want me to do it because he loved the sound of the acoustic. And I think he just thought if Dave gets his electric bass out, he's going to be slapping all over the place. He's going to be doing two-handed tapping, all this kind of stuff. I assured him that wasn't the case. And he eventually let me play electric. But in the early days, he still kept telling me to play less. And I think a lot of it's to do with, Jools being a pianist, and particularly a boogie-woogie pianist, fundamentally. There's a lot of stuff going on in his left hand. He's playing a lot of bass lines himself. So the two things he said to me was, apart from playing a whole lot less, he asked me to avoid playing in the very lower registers of my instrument. So he wanted me to play, in the middle upper registers. And I think this for twofold. One was to keep out of his way, to keep out of that area. But secondly, a lot of the old recordings that Jools heard, if you were a double bass player back in the 30s and the 40s, the only way you could get heard in a lot of those recordings was to play higher up on the G and the D strings. I mean, not necessarily soloing, but, high walking bass lines. So Jools liked that too. So he asked me to play higher up. So that was the first thing. And then, he definitely said, could you play a whole load less? I remember once we did one gig, and I think I had some friends in the audience, and I was trying to show off a little bit. So there was one song, and I did something that I wouldn't normally do and put a few extra things in there. And Jools came to me after the gig, and he said, Dave, he was getting a little weather report back there. I didn't say anything, but I thought to myself, thought to myself, Jools, I should be so lucky, and you should be so lucky. If only. But here's the other thing as well, because he likes that kind of muted bass sound. When you get a bass guitar and you palm mute it, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in other words, he loves James Jamerson. Two of Jools' favorite bass players are Charlie Mingus and James Jamerson. So, and me too, in fact. They're two of my favorites. But, Jamerson had that quite muted sound. He had the foam at the bridge. So I didn't want to kind of do that, because I just thought, well, if I put the foam in there, it's going to sound like that all night for every single song. When you play with Jools, because we have to play with so many artists, different genres, that sort of muted sound isn't going to suit everything. So I just started to use that palm mute thing, and I play with my thumb. So I was plucking with my thumb, like Monk Montgomery. If you look at, I think that's how he did it. When he switched from upright to electric, he was just plucking with his thumb. So here's the thing. So Jools encouraged that massively. But I think one of the reasons why he did it was he thought to himself, well, if Dave's just playing with his thumb, he's not going to be able to play anywhere near as fast as he was playing with his two fingers. Yeah. So I think Jools, he was quite crafty there. It wasn't just a sonic thing. He was trying to slow me down. Yeah. So me just playing and do you know what? It was interesting, because first of all it was frustrating, but it was a revelation, because it changed my playing. It did make me a lot more thoughtful about what I was doing. I thought, I can't play with the same speed and dexterity. But then it made me think way more about note choices, about phrasing, dynamics even. So actually, his kind of like sneaky little plan to get me to play whole lot less notes really kind of made my playing much better. It made I had a huge leap forwards in my playing. So yeah, it was great. But funny enough, then I had an injury. I had a very bad injury on my right hand thumb. I snapped a ligament in my thumb a few years back. Yeah, it was pretty painful, and I was really panicking, because I thought to myself, well, again, I'm a player that plays with my thumb. Not slap bass, but just plucking with it. So that's going to be a real problem. And of course, playing German bow as well. This is going to cause me terrible problems. So I went to a specialist, and they talked about surgery, and it was going to be really expensive if I was going to go privately. And then in the end, I spoke to a few people who'd had the same surgery, and they told me not to do it, because they had it themselves, and they said it didn't go well. It wasn't very successful. They had problems afterwards. And they said, you know what, if we were you, just let Mother Nature deal with it. And it's exactly what happened. And I was very careful. I went back to playing with my fingers. And actually, I started to play with the pick. The bass, because that's how I started when I first began. So, because I was always a fan of people like Carol Kay and players like that. So, but it was a lot less pressure on my thumb. So these days I actually play. When I'm playing bass guitar, I probably play 95% with a pick. Because again, some of my favorite players are pick players. People like Anthony Jackson, Steve Swallow, Cody Wright. I don't know if you know Cody, but check him out. He's a fantastic pick player. Bobby Vega, of course. So the injury kind of, although initially it was pretty painful and it was frustrating, because it got me playing with a pick, and I love using it now. And the fact that you can use it in more settings. The people associate the pick with playing kind of heavy metal and stuff. Well, go listen to Steve Swallow play beautiful bass lines and solos playing with a metal pick on a bass guitar, But yeah, I could probably still go back to play with my thumb these days. But yeah, I'm enjoying playing with the pick.
Yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, and so many of those classic use a pick, and I love that distinctive Steve Swallow sound with the metal pick. That's a very
and I got one of his bass guitars. It's made by a guy called Harvey Citron, and it's like a hollow body bass. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Steve has a really interesting sound. The combination of a pick. Yeah, I think it's made of copper. It's a copper pick playing a semi-acoustic instrument. But of course, Steve was one of those rare players that he switched, didn't he, from upright to bass guitar, but didn't carry on doubling them. He made that complete switch. Now, for me, I've always wanted to play both. Yeah. For me, it's important. I love both instruments. But you know what? A lot of people said to me, if you had to choose one over the other, what would it be? And I always say it would be double bass. I'd always pick the upright.
Wow.
Because to me, I feel much more affinity with it. I feel much more connected. And especially if you're kind of playing jazz, big band stuff. I mean, I can do that on electric bass, but I don't enjoy it as much. It doesn't feel the same, And the more that I've been getting into playing with a bow as well, do you know what I'd love to do now? I would love to join like an amateur rehearsal orchestra. I'd love to do that in my spare time.
Well, I'm sure they'd love to have you. That would be a lot of fun. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for the conversations there. Well, I would love to know, because we talked about the process that you have preparing for a Jools show and transcribing out. And I know that you play all over the place with Jools. I look at your calendar and you're all over the place. What does a week look like for you, just in terms of you're doing this preparation for the gig, you're playing in different venues? What's a typical week in the life these days, if there is one?
Yeah, well, I guess it all depends on if the TV show's on and we're touring. So when we start to tour, which is at the end of this month, we're kind of usually out 4 or 5 days a week, which leaves little time to do anything else. But then, if you're touring and the TV show's on, I mean, that's tough because the TV show's recorded, say, on a Tuesday, and then we'll go out on tour from Wednesday to Sunday. So someone described me once. They said, they called me an industrial bass player. And first of all, I wasn't quite sure how to take that, because most of the time you're used to being called melodic, inventive, whatever. But someone said you're an industrial player. And I kind of, after a while, I understood it because it's like being on a conveyor belt with Jools. There was so much kind of going. When we do his radio shows, again, the TV and the radio shows are seasonal. Yeah. So they're not on every week of every month kind of thing, So the TV show, there's 2 series each year. The radio shows, there's 2 series. Now, when you're doing those, it usually takes up 2 or 3 days a week. But luckily, we don't usually tour at the same time we do the TV shows. They try and keep those separate. Because I think if we were trying to do it all at the same time, we literally would be out 7 days a week and we wouldn't be able to sleep or do any laundry or anything like that. So that's what they do. They separate the TV, the radio shows. So in some ways, to answer your question really quickly, there isn't a typical week.
Dave and I also talk about recording for the TV show and all the logistics that go into it.
If you listen to the broadcast, it sounds like it's live, but they're all pre-recorded. It's the only way you can do it because you're not going to get people like Paul McCartney and Kylie Minogue and whoever giving up their own New Year's Eve to record a TV show.
Right.
But we recorded the beginning of December. But at the beginning of December, we're out on the road. We're actually touring. So this is really tough. So what happens is we're all in our hotel rooms during the tour with our computers, and we're learning the songs for the New Year's Eve TV show. Now, on that show, we have to play with 12, 13, 14 different artists. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of songs, and we'll be playing, their original songs, some classic songs, whatever. But we've got to learn them in our spare time. But we're still technically on tour. So so after each gig on tour, no getting back to the hotel and having drinks and parties and goodness knows what. It's straight back to your room and learning the songs. Now, here's the thing. The horn section, that they do arrangements for these songs, but they don't do anything for the rhythm section. The rhythm section, we have to learn the songs ourselves. So yeah, so I'm in my hotel room with a pile of manuscripts, pencil, sharpener, eraser, and I'm sitting there with some headphones on, just transcribing all of these songs. But then, there's only so much you can do in one evening. So then I'll do a couple, and then the next day you travel to the next gig, do the gig, come back, do a couple more. But, we don't get a lot of time to learn all these songs. We get, by the time we get sent them, we may get a week and a half to learn these songs. And bear in mind, you're playing with people like Jeff Beck, you're playing with people like Eric Clapton, Smokey Robinson, whatever. You can't just kind of learn these songs. You've got to play them like you've been playing them all your life.
Yeah.
But I guess we've been doing it for so long now, there's an expectancy. We've done it before, so the producers think, no, they're going to do it again. But it's hard work. It's hard, like I said, because we're learning this stuff while we're touring. So the songs for that TV show are nothing to do with the tour. It's completely separate. But yeah, so we have to learn on average about 13, 14, 15 songs, and it's stuff that we've probably never played before, never heard before. So yeah, it's real hard. It's hard work. So we've already been touring for 2 months. We record the TV show, and then we go back out on tour again the following day. We literally just have a couple of days off to do this TV show, and then we back out on tour for another 3 weeks. So you can't even relax, and we're all really tired. We're exhausted.
How do you keep from getting burned out in a situation like that? I mean, it must be a real challenge.
Well, here's the thing, Jason. When a lot of us first started this gig, we were in our 20s. Like now, we're in, there's a few of us that were in our 50s, a couple of guys late 40s, and there's even a couple in their 60s. So we're all a lot older than we were. So the key thing is we're just taking better care of ourselves. When we were kind of younger, you'd come back from a gig and you'd want to stay up and have drinks with friends and hang out in the bar, whatever. I don't do any of that anymore. I've become really dull in my old age. I'm so boring, so boring. So yeah, I go back to my room after each gig on tour, and I'll either sleep if I need to, or I might listen to some music, or I might kind of read a little bit. But I certainly won't be staying up until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning like we used to in the old days. I mean, we were kind of, because the Jools gig, we were living a kind of semi-rock and roll lifestyle. Maybe not on the same level as the Who or the Rolling Stones, but we had our moments in our younger days. And there was some nights when we didn't go to bed at all. We started having fun and then went straight to the next gig. But there's no way I'm doing that at 52.
Yeah.
So now I'm more conscientious about health, and over the years I've had some health issues, more so than anyone else in the band. I lost a kidney back in the mid-90s, not for anything that I was doing to myself. It was just Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Something happened, and so I was in hospital for quite a while. My eating habits have changed. I eat a lot more healthy. I don't drink as much alcohol. I certainly don't drink before a gig or during a gig. I'll wait till afterwards. But yeah, I just get more sleep. I just get way more sleep. But also, do you know what's great? It's made me more conscientious about playing as well. In other words, I go back to my room, and sometimes I still want to do a transcription. I'll still do a little bit of practice, which to me is a lot more productive than being in the bar downstairs.
Sure.
So yeah, it's just as you get older, you become more conscientious about it. I mean, I certainly have. So yeah, sort of, better diet, more sleep, and again, it means that I'm not waking up the next day with a hangover.
Yeah,
and it means I can do some practice. I can do a transcription. I can. So I'm being more productive as well as being healthier.
Sure. Moderate. The rock and roll lifestyle has moderated to an extent.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. You know what? I've been doing it for I've been doing it for 20 odd years.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, do I really want to keep doing this for another 20 years? I thought, no, let's look after myself a bit more. Because the thing is, I still love doing what I'm doing, and I want a long career in this business. I've already been doing it for 35 years, and I'd love to be doing it, for as long as I possibly can. And you have to change things. You have to be a lot more sort of careful and conscientious. So yeah, but I had a good run of it. Yeah. Those heady rock and roll moments.
So I had just turned off the recorder. I always try to be respectful with my guest time, and someone as busy as Dave, I was just so thrilled to have him talking with me on the show about all these great topics in his life. And as soon as I turned off the recorder, Dave started telling me these amazing stories involving some of the celebrity encounters with Jools' band. So I flipped the recorder right back on in the middle of this amazing story involving Eric Clapton. So I'll set the scene. Eric Clapton was joining the band to play with Smokey Robinson. The hitch is there was not going to be any rehearsal with Smokey, no rehearsal whatsoever. So I flipped the recorder back on as Dave's sharing that story. And then Dave goes into another story just as good about Paul Simon playing a song called Wishbone with Paul Simon and how Paul never plays it the same way twice. So here are both of these stories.
Not only was it rewarding because it was challenging. So you've got to back this guy, one of these icons of modern music, Smokey Robinson. But you've never even met or played with him before. You've not even run through it. So, but I love those challenging moments, Jason. Do you know what I mean? I love to be pushed. Even at this stage in my life, I enjoy the challenge of learning songs at very short notice and playing with these guys without rehearsals. But it was hugely rewarding. And if you watch that video, I mean, I've got the biggest grin on my face imaginable because I've just spent the day with Eric Clapton. I'm now sitting next to him playing bass, and over there is Smokey Robinson singing. So really, what's not to like? It was one of the most hectic. It was because I'd never been put in that position before, and Eric certainly hadn't either. But again, it's like I said to you before, when you're in this industry, especially if you've already got a reputation, if you've got a long-established reputation, you just have to do what you have to do. You can't turn around and say, guys, we need a bit more time. Seriously, you've got to do it. It's sink or swim. But like I said, luckily, experience plays a big part in it. We've been playing long enough and stuff. But that was just one of my highlights of my career. And I just love the fact that Eric was saying to me, is this really happening? It's kind of, are we really going to play this on live TV without a rehearsal? I said, yeah, it looks that way, but and that's what I love about the Jools gig. Okay, we're not doing anything particularly groundbreaking. We're not. I mean, Jools does write original material, but we're not trying to sort of write an amazing sort of pop record or turn the music industry on its head. But but what we do is still very unique within the industry. I mean, we have to play with, like an enormous amount of artists, on a vast scale. We do it so regularly, and you have to play well. Admittedly, say for instance, one of my other favorite people to play with was Al Jarreau. I mean, I absolutely adore Al Jarreau, but all of his albums, and I don't mind coming along to these rehearsals with these albums and getting the guys to sign them. I've got no qualms with being an Uber fan in front of them. But yeah, Al Jarreau, George Benson, Chaka Kahn, these are just three of my favorites. Now, admittedly, I didn't get a phone call from those guys. In other words, I wasn't hired independently by those guys. I didn't get a separate phone call. I'm playing with a lot of these people mainly through my association with Jools. But that doesn't make it any less rewarding. And also as well, if any of us kind of screw up, if we play badly, even though we're in Jools' band and they're our guest, they're likely to turn around and say, really, guys? Even though we're playing in Jools' band, we still have to play like we're playing in their band. I have to play like I'm Al Jarreau's bass player, Smokey Robinson's bass player. You have to have that mindset when you do this gig. We recently played with Paul Simon. Paul Simon came on the show, and he wanted to do a song called Wristband off his new album. Now, Wristband is basically, it's a feature for vocals and double bass. There's virtually nothing else going on in it. When I first got the CD of it, I'm thinking, okay, because normally where I have to play is more in the background, so to speak. But it was almost like a bass solo with a bit of a vocal on it. And it's with Paul Simon of all the people, you know, and I was a big Simon & Garfunkel fan, love Paul Simon's own stuff. So anyway, normally when we do the TV show, I get shoved at the back because I'm 6'3", and the producer and the director don't like me at the front because I'm covering up everybody else. But this time, because it was such a big bass feature, they brought me forward, and I was standing next to Paul Simon the whole time. So again, if you go on YouTube and you look at that video, he and I are standing next to each other, and I never get to stand next to the artist, you know. But you know, that was a real high pressure thing because again, I wasn't just playing a simple bass part. It was like a bass solo almost. And this is again on live TV. So this was, you know, I was definitely put under the spotlight that day. But you know, again, it was so rewarding. Paul Simon was great, and he asked me about my bass because his father was a double bass player. So he was asking all about my bass and kind of where it was made, and also he was taking a real interest. He told me about he still has his father's bass. He said, I keep it in my office, it's still there. And we talked about sort of touring, because David Bowie had just passed away, so he was talking about him too. So we had a real great conversation, and I'm thinking to myself, this is just, you know, such a unique opportunity to actually not only play with a guy, but just sit and have a chat with him. But here's the thing, Jason, right? That song, it's every time we ran through it, he changed it. He changed the length of the bars each time. But every run through, I had to keep jumping to match up with his vocal. He didn't sing it the same twice. And I'm thinking to myself, oh no, we're going to have to play this live on TV soon. And he's not sang it the same twice. So yeah, so sometimes he'd do a bar less, sometimes he'd do a bar more. And because the bass was like kind of a 2-bar figure, you know, when you have to play the one bar and then you have to play the same bar again, I had to keep jumping to keep up with him. And I mean, and this is on live TV with the camera pointing right at me, you know. I mean, even if I say so myself, I think I did a pretty good job. But here's the interesting thing. I spoke to, and yeah, sure enough, on the TV, on the live recording, he changed it again. He did it differently on the actual recording. But you know, Paul's regular bass player, is it Bakiti, I think? Because he played on all the Graceland album. So that's his regular bass player. I met him recently at the Warwick Bass Camp in Germany. We were both there as guests, and we talked about this song, Wristband. And I said, is it me, or did he? And he stopped me in mid-sentence. He said, Dave, do not talk to me about that song. He said, Paul does it to me all the time. He said he's never done it the same twice. He said, it drives me insane. And I said, thank you. Thank goodness. Because I was thinking, is it just me? Am I kind of hearing this wrong? So yeah, when he does it with his regular guy, he's kind of like Paul Simon. He's busking it. He's keeping it very, very nebulous. That's all good and well. But if it was just a gig or a jam session, fine. A live TV show, that's, you've got to have your wits about you there. But luckily, I was well equipped for it, and I think it went really well. So yeah, the song's called Wristband, and it's on YouTube. I say to people, Jason, I say it's still better than working for a living.
And we finish up, Dave and I, chatting about Herbie Flowers, who played the bass part for Walk on the Wild Side, that great Lou Reed tune. So Dave talks about getting the opportunity to actually perform that with Herbie and just everybody that Dave's played with. And again, there's a list on Dave's website featuring everybody that he's played with. Definitely check that out, and we're linking up to that in the show notes.
On my website, there's a list of everyone I've ever played with. It's my whole CV's on there, and a lot of people still haven't seen it because they still ask me who's your favorite or who have you played with. But the thing with the list now, it is obscenely long. People often say to me, it's easier to say who you've not played with, and it is kind of getting like that, But yeah, it's nice to be able to say, I've played with 3 of the Beatles, I've played with 2 of the Rolling Stones, and you know what? Even the other day, last week, I was at like a bass convention here in the UK, and there's a bass player called Herbie Flowers, and Herbie was like, one of the top British session bass players. I mean, certainly back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and Herbie famously played the bass parts on Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. So Herbie plays double bass guitar, and tuba. He did a talk at this convention, and he was hilarious. He's such a funny guy. He's a great raconteur. But here's the thing. He wanted to demonstrate the bass part to Walk on the Wild Side. Now, it's two separate bass parts. If you listen to the intro of it, what it is, it's acoustic double bass. I think it's like a C slope sliding down to a low F. But then it's an electric bass part playing the higher melody. So, the iconic sort of, if you listen, it's two bass parts. So, but obviously you can't play them at the same time. He overdubbed it when he did the recording. So Herbie Flowers called me up out the audience to come and play the electric upper bass part. He's doing the slide down on an upright bass. But he called me up. So, and there was another bass player called John Bentley, who was the bass player in Squeeze, Jools' former pop band. And John plays guitar and sings. So there's us doing a rendition of Walk on the Wild Side. But I'm playing the bass part with the bass player that played on the original Lou Reed recording, So that was kind of fun. That was unexpected because I just went along as, just as a member of the audience. I was sitting there with my girlfriend watching, and then to get called up to play that half of the bass part. So that was kind of fun too. So I get to do some pretty cool things with some cool people, that's for sure.
Dave, thank you so much. So great to chat with you. And folks, check out his website, daveswiftbass.com. That's going to do it for another episode of Contrabass Conversations. I really hope you enjoyed this chat with Dave. I appreciate you listening. I know Dave does as well. And as time progresses, I'm trying to add more and more to the show notes. So they're kind of an experience in and of themselves. You'll get a lot out of it, even if you don't listen to the episode, which I hope you do. So I have some YouTube links to check out, and it's definitely visit contrabassconversations.com/Dave Swift to get more information. And obviously Dave's website as well. So thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. I'm going to be experimenting with doing a news show a little bit more, kind of spinning off news and listener feedback into its own kind of separate show. I've got some new ideas this week. Super excited to put them out. And I'm planning somewhere around the 10th anniversary of this show to start up another kind of spin-off, an all-music show. So that's going to be starting now. If you have some music you'd like featured on that, let me know. And I would love to hear from you. Regardless, feedback at contrabassconversations.com. You can hit me up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Type contrabassconversations.com/Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. It'll get you there. And if you're interested in supporting the show, whether financially or non-financially, all the different options for that are listed at contrabassconversations.com/support. Thanks again for tuning in. We will see you again soon for more life in the low end of the spectrum.